Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing brilliantly. Today, I'm going to go through question 5 for language paper 1 AQA. Now, this question is the biggest one on the language paper, so you need to make sure that you know how to answer it. I've had a couple of people come to me and be like, well, I know how to write an essay, but I'm not really sure about creative writing. And that is absolutely fair enough. They're completely different styles of writing. And this one is the simplest, I think, out of the two creative writing questions, because in paper 2, you will also be asked to do one that is slightly less creative. So that will be maybe an article or a letter or a leaflet. But that's not what today's video is about. This one is about the more creative one. So you're going to have either a description to do or a story to do. And it's up to you which you do, but I usually advise my students to do the description because it's easier to get the marks that way. You're going to have two options: write a description inspired by a picture that's given to you, or write a story on a topic that is given to you. And the thing to remember is that you are not being graded on your ability to stick to writing only according to that picture or according to that, prompt. They are assessing your writing skills. So it's not like the reading bit of the paper where you're expected to stay on a certain question, on a certain path. You're supposed to have a certain argument. It's not like that. You can write about whatever you want as long as it's engaging, it's compelling, you have this kind of sustained style. And that is the stuff that gets you the high marks. So you also want to be including things like metaphors, similes, all the stuff that you've been taught to recognize in the reading area. But you have to demonstrate that you can use them yourselves. So that includes things like short sentences, varied with long sentences, different kinds of punctuation. All of that is really, really important because that's what gets you the structural marks. So, yes, this whole thing is worth 40 marks. So, you need to write quite a lot. And I would say spend maybe 40 minutes on it in the exam if that's if you just got regular timing. I know some people have extended time, but if you've just got regular timing, then I'd spend 45 minutes on it because there's so many marks that can be awarded for it. If you are writing a story, it is a really good idea to follow the principles of Freytag's pyramid. So, when you're doing your structure question, you will know this because this is what you go to, like, first of all. So, beginning, middle, and end, right? So, that can be summarized with something a little bit more fancy that you can think about in your exam when you're actually writing your story. And that is exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So our exposition is our setting up of everything going on, so tone and setting and character. Our rising action is when the tension begins to build. So that's all the way up to the climax, and then something happens, and then we have the falling action, so we start to figure out how to deal with it, and then we have the resolution. So the resolution is the only one that's a bit funny and doesn't sound exactly like what it is. Everything is okay again, or we are left on a cliffhanger. So if we are left on a cliffhanger, obviously that doesn't sound like a resolution, but it still counts. And I would actually recommend leaving the story on a cliffhanger because it shows that you know how to do that effectively. But let's have a little think about how we would actually end up executing this. The reason being, I see so many students, they kind of just segue straight into their climax, and that's fine if you're doing in media res, which is starting with the action, which is also a very effective way to do things if you want to do that. But sometimes they're trying to do an exposition and they don't quite do it successfully because they are focusing too much on the next bit all the time. And of course, you should be thinking ahead. You should be able to foreshadow. That's really something that is good to be able to do because it shows you've planned. It's very sustained, very, very good. But make sure you're not just, flying past your exposition if you're trying to do one. So, what you want to do for an exposition is you want to do a lot of description. You want to think about what's going on, where the character is, the tone, for example, the tone versus like positive versus negative, completely different. If you think about something like a thunderstorm can be really calming. If you're just laying in bed and you're listening to the rain outside, can be very, very calming, versus, if you're terrified of thunderstorms, of course it's going to be completely different. And you can describe the exact same thunderstorm and what is happening with different tones, and I will show you that at a later date. But I think that is a really good example of how tone affects stories. It's also a good idea to think about pacing. So, pacing, of course, is how fast the text moves by. And I think really, if you're looking to have a fast pace, then probably short sentences are the way to go. If you're looking to have a slower pace, then you're probably going to want to look at longer sentences. So, our exposition, usually we want to be thinking about longer sentences, I would say. But when we're at the climax, which is usually when all the action's going down or there's a lot of tension, we're going to want to look at shorter sentences, short, snappy sentences that makes the text move by fast, and maybe also minor sentences, so sentences that technically aren't grammatically correct, but they can be used effectively. So that is sentences maybe without a verb in them, maybe one word sentences, and they can also be called sentence fragments. One of the biggest things I see students forgetting to do is varying sentence types, and that is a big deal because it gets you a lot of marks. There's pretty much a whole part of the mark scheme for this. Not exactly a whole part of the mark scheme, but pretty much. So, what we want to do is we want to be thinking about what type of sentences we're using. So, maybe minor sentences, like I said before. We might do simple, we might do compound, we might do complex, we might do compound complex, bit out there, but um, these are some examples. So, how could you, when you know I'm busy, go without me? So, we've got our dependent clause in there to vary things versus the sun was bright and radiant at the bottom here, which is just one independent clause. So, simple as you get, pretty much. Um, the happy medium is the compound sentence. So the sun was bright and radiant and it illuminated our sky. So we've got the and in there, which makes it a compound because it's joined by a conjunction. Now, this all sounds really complicated. It sounds very confusing. I'm not going to go into all the grammar technicalities right now. I will do another video on that because it's very useful for the structure question. But all you need to know is that you need to vary your sentence structure because that gives you a lot of marks. And here is the other part of the mark scheme. The other part of the mark scheme takes into account everything else, pretty much. So that means tone, it means style and register, as you can see on this slide. So we need to be able to communicate clearly and effectively and imaginatively. Sounds really scary. It's not, it's only, thinking of stories. That's all it is. And communicating clearly basically just means being able to speak in sentences, really. I mean, it's as simple as that. But the register is your formality. So make sure that you're adapting your register or your formality to whatever the paper says. And also tone and style, which is like I've said before about, the thunderstorms and stuff. We also need to be able to organize our ideas. You get big marks for that, big marks. Organizing information and ideas, and using structural and grammatical features to support this as well. So that basically means that you're not just, describing one thing and then describing another thing and then going back to the other thing. So I wouldn't, describe the sky and then describe the sea and then go back to the sky, unless there is a very big reason for it and it's actually effective, because otherwise it just looks like an afterthought. It kind of looks like you've just gone, oh, I forgot to put this in about the sky. So, big marks for organization, and it shows that you've planned as well. If you're aiming for the higher grades, this is the level you want to aim for. So we've had a look at level 1 and level 2, but the higher grades, are going for level 3 and level 4. So as you can see, it goes all the way up to 24 marks. That is the max grade. But what we have at the very, very top is the communication is convincing and compelling. So what we've got here is the fact that the writer has engaged the examiner. The writer has engaged the examiner and has pulled them in to their description or to their story. So obviously, it's going to take a lot to do that, right? But if you're using things like extensive and ambitious vocabulary and sustained crafting of linguistic devices, shouldn't be too hard. And we'll have a look at how to do that in a second. I'm just going to let us take a moment to think about the difference between level 4 and level 3. What do you think is the difference? Because consistently clear doesn't sound all that different from convincing and compelling, right? Well, communication is convincing and compelling pretty much just means that you are very self aware of the techniques you're using. You know what you're doing. You know how to write. And that doesn't mean to say that if you're in level 3, you don't know how to write. Level 3 is also excellent writing. I mean, it goes up to 18 marks. But if you want 19 to 24 marks, you need to be very compelling. You need to have a very sustained structure. You need to be using very good structural features, and not just structural features, but linguistic features as well. So, language features. And how are we going to do that? These are the things that are going to give us the marks. So, like it says here, you need to demonstrate that you can write about something effectively, and effectively often means including language devices and structure devices. So, what we have here, of course, repetition, anaphora, epistrophe, polysyndeton, and I'll go into that in a different video. I am working on it right now. But these are basically just forms of repetition. So, repetition, of course, is a form of repetition, of course. Anaphora, repeating the beginning of your line. Epistrophe is lesser known, but it's basically anaphora, just the other way around. It is repeating the end of the line or the sentence. And polysyndeton is repeating a conjunction. So you might say something like, I'm going to the shop to get eggs and milk and bread and whatever else you need, So that is repeating your conjunction. We might also include extended metaphors or just metaphors in general. This whole bullet point is types of metaphor. Personification is also a form of metaphor because it is attributing human qualities to something inanimate. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can have a look at them, you can practice using them. There are many, many different types of language devices that you can use. There is no set way of doing things, so it really is good to have a practice with some that you know. Of course, there is no exhaustive list of language devices, but out of all of them, these are the ones that I really, really recommend using because it shows that you've planned, it's effective, it's sustained. So, repetition, like I said before, but of course, make sure it's effective because you don't want to just look like you're just repeating because you don't know you're even repeating. Also, cyclical structure, fantastic thing to put in question 5 because it shows that you've had a plan all along, and it's also very engaging. Very similar with foreshadowing something that is about to come, maybe the climax, maybe the resolution, up to you. But as long as you make sure that you are dropping hints so that the examiner knows what you're talking about, it is a fantastic way to earn marks. The last thing I want to point out for question 5 is the fact that varying punctuation does seem to be forgotten quite a lot. And that is fair enough. I mean, in everyday speech, or not speech, but writing, we're usually using full stops and commas, and that's really it, unless you're like hardcore creative writing. But no, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can use colons and semicolons and dashes, ellipsis, and brackets and inverted commas, which is just speech marks pretty much with a different name. Yes, like it says here, try not to overdo the dialogue because otherwise you're not showing your descriptive skills. But varying punctuation is one of the best ways to get top grade marks because it is the highest part of the mark scheme. In the description, I'm going to put a little worksheet on how to make your writing more engaging when you're considering who your narrator is. If you think about it with these three examples, a portrait on the wall, a mirror, or a piece of gum, that's going to be way more interesting to read about for an examiner, and it's going to make your writing stand out to if it was just writing about a person, sort of just going about their daily life. So, definitely interesting to consider who the perspective is from. If you like this video, then please do give us a like because it does help out a lot, and I will see you next time.